Well, guys, our favorite hockey masked mama's boy turns another year older today.
Jason was my son, and today is his birthday.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Voorhees. Geez, the weird kid's mom, am I right? Anyway, happy Friday the 13th, and a most unlucky of aligning at that, as today, on a Friday, June the 13th, we celebrate what would also canonically be Jason Voorhees' 79th birthday. That's right, AARP, senior discounts and all, and still somehow managing to outsprint teenagers in peak physical condition.
Yeah, right. Happy fucking birthday.
And so, in the undead spirit of the holiday, I thought it no better way to celebrate than by ranking every single entry in the franchise that turned a lakeside drowning accident into a multi-decade long murder extravaganza.
And today is his birthday.
So with that said, I'll be including all 12 of the movies in the main franchise, as well as the 3 movies from the Never Hike Alone series made by Womp Stomp Films, which may be technically unofficial fan films, but they're so incredibly well done, and honestly, if you can get Tom York back to play Tommy Jarvis, you're as official in my opinion as it can get. So thus, we have a nice list of 15 films to rank from worst to best. Everything from Bag-Headed Hillbilly to Space Terminator to Demon Worm. I like the concept of Jason more than actual Jason, and yes, even his mama.
And today is his birthday.
This list is based on my own totally objective, scientifically accurate criteria such as kill creativity, the performance of our Jason, rewatchability, and I guess the overall plot, but that one much less so for obvious reasons. So sit back, smoke some pot, or have some premarital sex, and prepare to get irrationally mad that I ranked Part 5 higher than Part 1. I didn't. Or did I? You'll have to find out.
And today is his birthday.
Okay, Pam, we get it, for fuck's sake. Before we start slicing our way through the list, since the YouTube machine is powered through the suffering of humans, please make sure you do all the things to all the buttons. Maybe say something spicy about how Jason Goes to Hell is criminally underrated. Or not. I don't care.
You should have been watching him every minute!
Taking the bottom spot at number 15 is going to be Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, and this is the one that I remember being way better when I was younger, but every single time I watch it as an adult, I see it more for the piece of shit that it really is.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
And that's a real shame, because the concept of Jason going to New York and wreaking havoc on a massively populated area is a cool idea in theory. Especially if you think about it the way they could have connected to the beginning of Jason X, where he is now being held by the government after becoming essentially a public nuisance. And we've seen how effective and cool of a horror setting the Big Apple can be when it's done right, like it was in Scream 6. But everybody knows Jason Takes Manhattan isn't what we got, and instead we got Jason Takes a Shitty Boat to Canada. Now, the writer/director Rob Hedden knew he wanted to take Jason away from Crystal Lake, and he came up with a couple different ideas. One was like an Alien-esque style plot with Jason stalking a cruise ship, and the other was placing Jason in New York City, with Hedden stating, everything about New York was going to be completely exploited and milked. There was going to be a tremendous scene on the Brooklyn Bridge, a boxing match in Madison Square Garden. Jason would go through department stores, he'd go through Times Square, he'd go into a Broadway play, he'd even crawl on top of the Statue of Liberty and dive off. He got both concepts approved, but rather than choosing, he combined them into one idea. Oh, and he wanted to explore Jason's childhood in all of this as well. Then they found out how expensive shooting in New York would be, and they would not be able to get anywhere near as ambitious as they had anticipated, and so what we got instead was a movie with a bunch of half-baked characters and a jumbled plot that made no sense whatsoever, which I know is an issue for a lot of these, but this one really stands out as probably the worst offender. Most of the cast ends up being forgettable. The only one worth rooting for is the dog. The final girl, Rennie, is pretty fucking pointless as a character for calling a spade, and they originally wanted Lisa Wilcox, who plays Alice in Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and 5 for the role, but she wisely said no. And I just want to point out, they turned down Jessie from Saved by the Bell and Pam goddamn Anderson for the role, so that tells you everything you need to know about their decision making. Even decades later, I still can't wrap my head around what they were going for with the whole kid version of Jason stalking Rennie, and like the way it all ties into how he eventually gets taken out by toxic sludge that I guess does the opposite of the stuff that the Ninja Turtles got into. I don't know, man.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
My fellow fans of the Friday the 13th game will understand what I mean when I say that this movie is seemingly where his shift power was born, as he pretty much teleports wherever he needs to be in this one. It's not to say this movie doesn't have its couple of standout moments, like obviously Julius shooting the fade with Jason and getting his head knocked off right after. And honestly, despite the movie having a somewhat lackluster bunch of kills as a whole, there are a couple that I think if they had invested in the effects, they could have gotten some of the better ones in the franchise. Like the guitar kill, if we had actually gotten to see it, or the very first kill of the movie. Like, what the fuck is that supposed to be? The dude's insides? Or did you accidentally stab where the toilet flushes on the boat? I try to keep in mind this movie was the most expensive one they had made up to this point. And dude, the hot sauna rock through the stomach kill, that lived in my brain for a long time as a kid. And seeing it as an adult, it just makes me wonder what it could have been, because that's a genuinely horrific way to die. There's also this hilarious moment I still laugh at, quoting to this day, where they're divvying up the weapons to go hunt Jason down.
What are you taking, Julius? Nothing. But this gun.
I also really like the beginning song, Darkest Side of the Night by Metropolis, and I feel like it's paired really nicely with the intro. This is Kane Hodder's second go-around as Jason, and while I don't think he quite lives up to the previous performance in 7, he does his best with what he's given. That's the best I can say. I don't know, I can't help but think that if they had focused on making just the cruise ship idea work, that this could have been a much better movie. And if you don't know already from previous videos, one thing about me is that when you have a great idea and fumble it horribly, it stands out as a worse miss overall than a movie that was never going to be good in the first place. I can still have a small amount of stupid fun watching this, but it's without question the worst one overall. Okay, here we go.
You are going to hate me for this.
Number 14 is going to be the original Friday the 13th. Okay, look, right? I understand if this is a controversial opinion, because historically placing a franchise's opening movie so far below so many of its sequels and its successors is blasphemy in the movie world, but what can I say? Despite that being true for the likes of like Nightmare on Elm Street and the Halloweens of the world, you're going to have the outliers that did not age as well, like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and unfortunately, in my opinion, the OG Friday the 13th. Now, if you don't know the history, this was heavily inspired by and basically done as a response to the original Halloween. They just upped the kill count and focused more on making that aspect be the centerpiece. And really, the movie's way ahead of its time in that they understood the kills were what was going to be the selling point of the slasher genre going forward. Director Sean S. Cunningham has said he wanted the film to be shocking and make people get out of their seats, and as we've seen with movies like the Terrifier franchise in recent times, that model has worked and is still being pushed beyond any boundaries that could have been imagined. I think the summer camp setting is perfect in how it essentially used the scary story told around the campfire aspect that most of us from that generation are familiar with, but then it becomes a reality. And the gore is surprisingly still pretty good by 1980 standards. And, I don't know, the kills are alright. You know, like the arrow through Kevin Bacon's throat, that's decent. Speaking of the Baconator, seriously, Wendy's, that's a fucking layup. How have you not nailed that down? It's obviously fun getting to go back and see him in one of his first roles, and Betsy Palmer does a great job as the whacked out Pamela Voorhees, and she's actually creepy in her own genuine way as the whacked out mother thirsty for revenge.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her. Don't let her get away, Mommy. Don't let her live.
I won't, Jason. I won't.
And I can absolutely respect this movie for the franchise it birthed and the legacy that it holds due to all of that. But
it's so bleeding boring, isn't it?
I'm sorry guys, I just never have the urge to rewatch this because it is such a slog to get through. The script and the characters in general just overall are dog shit, including our final girl Alice, who is legitimately possibly one of the weakest ones of all time, certainly within this franchise. And let's be honest, it has a Jason-sized hole in it in retrospect, and it just doesn't stack up well against the rest of the franchise, in my opinion. So, if this is higher on your list because of your experience with it, sure, I guess whatever, I don't begrudge you, but it's not for me. Coming in at number 13 is going to be Part 5, A New Beginning, the copycat cosplay Jason edition. And admittedly, between this and another one we'll be talking about shortly, this is one of the movies in this franchise I have seen the least. I learned early on, before I ever saw it, that the killer was not actually Jason in this, and to my young brain, that was enough to check out and never really give a fuck about this movie.
Well, if that's the way you feel, forget it, Vic. Just forget it. But I think you're really out of line.
But as I've gotten older, I have grown to somewhat appreciate the attempts to at least try something a little different. Even if it's not ground-shattering innovative, having it be a copycat in an effort to hold true to 4 being the final Friday, and to be able to bring Jason back without bringing him back, so to speak, was a mildly smart move. I also like the idea of picking up with Tommy Jarvis as a PTSD-riddled young adult, struggling with what his previous encounter with Jason kind of did to his psyche, and the skills that the legit martial artist John Shepard brought to that role give a badassness to Tommy that adds a lot to his character. And apparently Shepard and the rest of the cast were not told until they were already signed on that this film Repetition they thought they were making was actually just a working title for Friday the 13th Part 5, and John Shepard, who had spent months working at a mental hospital prepping for the role, was understandably pissed off. Now, if you aren't aware, this was also directed by Danny Steinman, who cut his teeth shooting pornos in the 70s, and he definitely understood that the bodies are really what people come to see these for, so you can see where the decision was to incorporate a huge kill count, and also a huge bunch of sex, because it's what they knew best, with Steinman being quoted as saying, "We shot a fucking porno in the woods there. You wouldn't believe the nudity they cut out." And as far as the kills, I mean, outside of the tree strap one, there's really not anything all that memorable. It is obvious early on the creators are not taking it very seriously and just kind of leaning into the crazier, more outlandish aspects, which, I don't know, maybe has a lot to do with the drugs and stuff that were on set reportedly. But to me, it made for a more fun movie than the original, and I would 100% rather watch this on a repeat than Part 1. Number 12 is going to be Jason Goes to Hell, and this one's a weird one. It's the one I've seen probably the least number of times, only once or twice as a kid, and then I rewatched it for this ranking, fully expecting it to be battling for that bottom spot, and god damn it if I didn't enjoy this way more now as an adult with a fully formed sense of humor. I think this is easily one of the funniest installments we get in the entire franchise, and if you watch it with that in mind as like a comedy that's just full schlock, I was laughing my ass off.
In my professional opinion, this guy's dead in shit.
How you doing, you badass, maggoty, blown-up fuck? Suck this! Suck it.
Well, that makes me think of a little girl in a pink dress sticking a hot dog through a donut.
Like, it's the most mental fucking thing ever, and those of you who have watched my Van Damme ranking and know where his famously bad movie Derailed ranked, you'll know something being so bad it's hilariously good sometimes is the sugar that daddy likes. One thing, especially for early 90s standards before it was played way the fuck out, I don't hate the concept of explaining Jason's unkillable nature as being a quote-unquote demon just using Jason's body to cause destruction in the real world, especially narratively for where ultimately we're going with Freddy's inclusion and his attempts to do sort of the same thing in a way. I think it's different and creative. Let's just say it's not how I would have gone about it. One of the big negatives is just the introduction of Jason's long-lost family members, and them in this magic dagger being the only ones being able to kill him. That's weak-ass writing 101. I think this is probably Kane Hodder's weakest turn as Jason as well, which I guess isn't saying a whole lot since we don't get a ton of screen time with him anyway. And while I don't hate the look in this movie like some people do, one thing I really don't like is the inclusion of the grunts and the screams that he incorporated here. It just doesn't work for me. However, one of the things that does work for me is I really love the character of Creighton Duke, the bounty hunter trying to take Jason down. I think he's a scene stealer, and he is obviously one of the best parts of the entire movie.
Why don't you blow me, Chief? Right after your girlfriend there gets through.
The kills and the gore in this are also very good after the MPAA edited the shit out of the previous few movies, especially that signpost kill in the tent. The most important part of this entire movie, though, and the only part I ever cared about as a kid, was that final scene of Freddy's glove pulling Jason's mask down to hell, and you hear that maniacal laugh, which was the clue to everyone that we were, in fact, getting that rumored crossover movie between them. We just had no idea how long it would be before we got it. Ultimately, I feel as though, much like Halloween 3, if you can separate yourself somewhat from what the franchise conditions you to expect from its movies, you can have a lot of fun with this one, which is why it's not all the way at the bottom. In at number 11 is going to be Part 7, The New Blood. This was actually the first Friday the 13th movie I ever saw in its entirety from start to finish. Now, I had seen bits and pieces of the first 4 movies here and there while people were flipping through channels back in the day, but this was the first one I ever sat down intending to watch when I was hanging out with my buddy Dennis, who was one of the people who helped bring my love of horror movies to life. So, shout out to you if you're watching this, dude. You got blood on your hands. But because of that, I have a bit of fond nostalgia for this movie, whereas I know a lot of the fan base shits on it. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of reasons to, honestly, with the obvious one being that this is one of the tamest movies of the franchise in regards to the kills and the gore. And that simply was because the MPAA absolutely gutted this movie down due to the time period in which it came out. And that really sucks because the uncut versions of all of these deaths are out there on the tube to be found now. And if those had made the movie, this would be significantly better overall. It's a real shame those uncut versions are not in a shape they could be remastered and added back to the actual film to make it a reality. Like, seriously, Russell's death scene, or Ben's, or even what is easily the most famous kill from this movie, which is the sleeping bag kill, is much better in its uncut version, where Jason slams her multiple times against the tree instead of just the one, and you see the bag just getting bloodier and bloodier. Just a really good group of them overall. Our group of cannon fodder victims in this isn't overly exciting, as this is the group that kind of feels maybe the most like they gave one attribute to each character just so you could identify them, but they're serviceable enough, I suppose, as they all gather for a birthday. Oh no.
And today is his birthday.
The setting of what I guess is supposed to be Crystal Lake is a huge downgrade from the previous movies, as they shot this one in Mobile, Alabama, and it just looks visibly not right for what we've come to expect. And I think that really comes down to the fact that this movie was thrown together when the initial attempts for a Freddy vs. Jason crossover fell apart. So they pivoted and went with a Jason vs. Discount Carrie, which leads me to our final girl, Tina. Now, I think Lar Park Lincoln, rest in peace, portrays a fairly good final girl, and I do think introducing someone that has an ability to actually be somewhat of a match for Jason and being able to telekinetically fight him back was a cool idea after having 6 movies of more or less the same thing from our protagonists. That does lead to one of the better final confrontations, at least as far as the fight, in that she really does kick Jason's ass at points and provides something we had not seen up to that point. I also like the concept of her struggling with keeping her power in check and the guilt she has over accidentally being the one responsible for her father's death when she was a kid. even if that leads to one of the stupider ways of Jason actually being finished off when she apparently brings her dad back to life to resubmerge Jason at the bottom of the lake. I genuinely don't know why they went with this, but whatever.
That's all.
Bullshit!
And the use of the Doctor character as the instigator and someone that you're supposed to cheer for when they die was actually really smart, as this is the first movie I think that they did that before replicating it in future installments. This is also Kane Hodder's first turn as Jason, who many people consider to be the best person who's ever donned the hockey mask. Not me personally, but a lot of people do.
Go away! I hate you! I wish you were dead!
And this is honestly probably his best outing as Jason in the 4 goes he gets in the role. And one of the things I really like is the look of Jason being all decomposed with his body being damaged from being submerged all this time, and then as Tina starts to kick his ass during the movie and he loses his mask, the effects and everything were just done so well. All in all, this one is just ultimately more of a letdown than a bad movie to me, but it has just enough nostalgia power to stay out of the basement entirely. At number 10 is going to be the first Never Hike Alone film. And if you aren't aware, this was a movie that was crowdfunded by Womp Stomp Films, and while the main franchise is caught up in legal hell, this actually serves as an amazing offshoot and spiritual successor if we never get another proper Friday the 13th movie again. So if you've not seen these yet, do yourself a favor, go do that before you have anything spoiled in this video, and then come back. Anyway, in the 3-part set of movies we have gotten so far, this first one serves as kind of the middle piece of the story, and in it we follow a travel blogger named Kyle who's documenting his adventures and happens upon the remains of Camp Crystal Lake, and in turn meets its legendary occupant. Now, I do really like the baseline idea behind this because it's a very realistic approach and a reason why someone would be there. This also gives us something we've never really had in this franchise, which is rather than a group of people just for Jason to stalk and kill, this is essentially just a 1v1 matchup between Jason and a game opponent who knows how to survive. This lends to a ton of great tension-filled moments and them really having to make use of the environment as much as possible. Unfortunately, the drawback to that is the kill count and the gore do suffer from it, and so if this movie was still a standalone adventure without 2 more films to flesh out that aspect, that would be a real weakness, but luckily that's not the case, and since the appetite for that gets satiated better in the subsequent movies, it makes it much more forgivable because you know where it's going. Now, our main guy Kyle is pretty good, and the most important thing they do is take the time to make him feel likable, which in turn allows you to root for him to escape death. Jason is played by our director in this franchise, Vincente DeSanti, and I think that gives it a nice sense of love and care for the project because he's able to capture the exact element of the character he wants. Even without racking up a huge body count, he's still an absolute fucking unit and he sells the menace, highlighting the scary aspect of a more physically imposing Jason. Now, Tom Matthews also makes his triumphant comeback in this as Tommy, and while his appearance in this feels kinda throwaway, once again, once you know where it's headed, it makes it all make sense and feel less like, that's it, that's all they brought him in here to do. Anyway, great beginning to the story and ultimately did exactly what it needed to as a proof of concept of sorts of what Womp Stomp is able to bring to the table. Right above that at 9 is the prequel Never Hike in the Snow. Now this is the shortest film on this list at only 31 minutes, and this shows us the events of 6 months prior to Never Hike Alone. It introduces us to a mother and son who have just moved into the area and their experiences dealing with the local mass murderer. This gives us another yet first-time thing in the franchise also by providing us a wintertime Camp Crystal Lake setting, which is something that has been desired for a long time, and I think they execute it so well here. Now, performance-wise, everyone is also really good. They bring back the character of Rick the Dick, Tommy's nemesis from Part 6, who is now the acting sheriff, and doing whatever he can to cover up and keep quiet an old problem that keeps coming roaring back, like I do with my responsibilities. Vincente DeSanti gets a bit more of a chance to stretch his legs in this one too, and seems to really settle into the role all the way during it. This also has kind of a low body count comparative to some of the rest of the movies on the list, but the ones it gives us in this are a couple of really nice kills. This is really a perfect little interlude to connect the two Never Hike Alone movies, even though it is a prequel, and I don't have a lot of negative to say about it. The only real con to it and what keeps it away from the top is just that it's so short, it just ends up leaving me wanting more, which luckily we did get, just not for a few more years. I think that if this was fleshed out into a more full-length thing, it could definitely be much higher, but this is great for what it is. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Part 3, and this is actually my son's favorite of the Friday movies, at least currently. He has yet to see some of the more intense movies that are higher on this list, but that gives it some extra points for me. But traditionally, this one has always been a huge mixed bag for me because there is so much to like about this movie, but it does have a few glaring flaws that hold it back some. Now, Richard Brooker's performance as Jason is one of the better ones in the franchise, I think, and I like the backstory, so to speak, we get in this one between Jason and our final girl, Chris, who had an encounter with him years prior, having grown up near Crystal Lake. And they don't come right out and implicitly say it, but it's always been kind of obvious to me, at least, that Jason seemingly has an infatuation with Chris sexually. You know, they don't say he was trying to essay her during the wobbly flashback scene that we get, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that. And then when you get the final confrontation between them, which I think is great, by the way, very underrated, you see several moments of this, like, acknowledgement of, like, oh, it's you. But I think adds way more menace and more personality to this character up to this point we had not seen yet. And real quick, during that final confrontation is another moment that just makes me laugh every single time, and that's when Jason is hit with the axe and he just fucking throws his hands up in the air out in front of him. I mentioned Chris, our final girl, and I think she's decent. She's better than Alice in 1, but coming off such a strong comparison in Ginny in Part 2, who we'll talk about in a little bit, she's just a bit of a downgrade. In fact, most of the cast is pretty much a downgrade, with Shelley being the only real memorable character, and not really in a good way.
What are you doing?
You went too far this time.
But if you're only here for the kills, this movie has the best ones up to this point in the franchise, and a lot of them still hold up to this day, from the ones everyone still talks about, like the harpoon gun in the eye, and the head-crushing scene where Chris's kind of rapey boyfriend gets his eye popped out of the camera, and even some of the others. You know, I've always liked the way the goofy dude who walks on his hands gets split down the fucking middle, and then you just see the aftermath of it shortly after.
Where's this coming from?
Just overall a really good assortment and a higher body count than 2, which does help it some. Now, in a lot of ways, they were still figuring some things out in this one, and I think the experimentation that was done in this is what allowed for the next installment to really fire on all cylinders. This is obviously the one where Jason acquires his now iconic hockey mask that he's forever associated with, and it was actually not a planned thing. It just so happened to come about by improv during the filming, and they realized the look was such a home run that they just ran with it, and I've always found that cool. Now, one of the experiments I've never been a fan of, though, is the old school 3D gimmick. Now, I'm sure it was cool for the time, but it just hasn't aged well at all, because now when you go watch it, the moments of them just putting something close to the screen that was meant to induce the effect in theaters, it's just easy to spot and it feels out of place, and when you do spot them, it kind of takes you out of the movie a little bit, and so that's just always played against it. This one also does meander a little bit at times, but once it gets going, this is a really solid entry I can still have a tremendous amount of fun with. In at number 7 is going to be Jason X, and I have a lot of fond memories of this from watching it with my friends when it first came out, as this was kind of really the first one we were alive and in the fandom for the release for, so it's special for that reason. Usually the Goes to Space edition is the death nail for a franchise, but this one actually works, and I kinda like the way they do it, of showing Jason about to escape the attempts to cryogenically freeze him until they can figure out how to kill him for good someday, and ultimately he and our survivor end up frozen together, and then retrieved hundreds of years later after Earth has become a nuclear wasteland by some college kids on a field trip from Earth 2. I know it sounds stupid, but I don't know, man, I just find this fun. This is Kane Hodder's last go as Jason, and I think it's a good final effort from him. He certainly seems to be having some fun with it this time. Some people don't like the look of Uber Jason, but I think he looks badass, and I wish so bad we would have been able to get this movie's update for the game before the boys started having their legal pissing match over the franchise rights, because this was truly the only piece that felt like it was missing from the game. But anyway, the rest of the cast is... they're okay, with our main final girl Rowan being the obvious standout, and she's actually a bigger badass than I remember every time I go back to revisit this, and I remember her more for it. She kind of feels like a Sidney Prescott style final girl to me. I also really like Peter Mensah's character, and the in-movie rivalry we get between Jason and Doctore is awesome as well, but beyond that, it's largely just cannon fodder for Jason to hack through, which, speaking of, this has some of the best kills as a whole across all of the franchise, including certainly the most creative one with the frozen face smash. Also, I think this has the better sleeping bag kill in my opinion.
Hey, you want a beer?
Or do you want to smoke some pot?
I do have to say it was a gallant effort with the attempts to explain his regenerative powers as a means for how he can just never seemingly die, and to try and establish some sort of new lore after all this time regarding that. I'm just not sure how well it sticks, to be honest. This is also one of the funnier entries though in the series for both purposeful and accidental reasons. All in all, I can see why people have some issues with this, but I find it to be a good entry and one I can just appreciate for what it is, shut my brain off, and just enjoy it. Number 6 is going to be part 2, and this has always felt like the true original Friday the 13th movie, because I think it is basically a superior version of that first movie in pretty much every way, and does exactly what you want a sequel to do. This is the introduction of Jason as the main villain, and it's the one where we get Sackhead Jason, as they hadn't figured out quite yet the hockey mask like we mentioned earlier. And the Sackhead version of Jason is not something I'm totally against, as they do a much better version of it later in the franchise, but this version of him is definitely a lot less scary than what he would become. But I'm sure for 1981 standards, this was terrifying. He's played by the combo of stuntman Steve Dash and Warrington Gillette this time, and they are far from the best the man would get, but they do alright considering there was really no template quite yet to follow. I mentioned earlier our final girl Jenny, and apart from Tommy Jarvis, she's probably the best survivor that we get. I like the time spent during the script where she's trying to understand the idea of who Jason would be if in fact he did exist, and the psychology behind his relationship with his mother, and what seeing her killed would have set off in his head.
And you know, the only person that ever knew him was his mother. He never went to school, so he never had any friends. I mean, she was everything to him.
And this helps her as far as finding a way to confuse him by posing as Pamela to slow him down, get the drop on him, and ultimately escape him.
Jason, Mother is talking to you!
Jason, Mother is talking to you.
Amy Steele, who played Jenny, stated that they really wanted her back for the third movie, and that it would have focused on her learning how to fight back and going on the hunt to kill Jason and avenge her friends, but she ultimately turned it down. Now, the rest of the cast of counselors are really good and memorable too, from Jeff and Sandra, who we spend a good amount of time with, to the prankster Ted, to the wheelchair-bound Mark, who, fun fact, his last name happens to be Jarvis in the script, to the pervy-ass weirdo Scott. Everybody pretty much gets some sort of proper attention placed on them before they get taken out, which I really like. Speaking of that, the kills are solid in this one, and a continued upgrade from the original, starting with Jason finishing off the previous movie's final girl Alice, which not every sequel has the guts to do, to Mark getting the machete through the face and then sent down the stairs while still lifeless in his chair. All of them, for the most part, are somewhat memorable, and one of the cool things that this movie did is it left the fate of the Paul character ambiguous, to the point that fans still debated for decades whether or not he was killed off screen, which, if you're curious, all evidence points to the fact that yes, he was. And the rumor is that if Jenny would have been back for part 3, the beginning would have seen her finding Paul's head in the washing machine when she got back to college after the events of 2, which I have to admit I'm glad they didn't do that because it would have just been recycling the beginning of 2 with Alice, but anyway, very good entry, still one of the better ones after all these years. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Part 6, and I actually know a few people that this one is their favorite of the franchise. While I obviously don't agree, it's still easily one of the best, and it certainly has the best song with Man Behind the Mask by Alice Cooper. Now this is the third and the final official appearance for Tommy Jarvis being our main guy, and sort of cements him as the one you think of when you think of Jason's main adversary. And I do like the use of him as that. I think it was pretty obvious after the way 4 led into 5 and the way 5 ended that Tommy was intended to be the next antagonist after he formally loses his shit beyond repair. But since that didn't look like it was going to work off the back of 5, they pivoted and made this a final confrontation between the two. And it does measure up to that in my opinion. Our Jason is played by C.J. Graham, who I've actually met before at a haunted house appearance and got an autograph from. And I think he does a really solid job with his one outing that he gets, even if I'm not crazy with the Jason the Toolman Voorhees look, with his tool belt looking like he's fixing to cut you and your front lawn up to look real nice. But anyway, this movie marks the line basically where we go from backwoods recluse human version to the Frankenstein zombie version of Jason that would become more or less the standard for the next several films, and C.J. Graham is the one who prototyped that template, so well done by him, even if I personally prefer the human Jason. This is also the first movie where Jason is thought of as like an urban legend that everyone knows about rather than just a scary campfire story that gets told to campers by counselors. And so a lot of the movie's humor is based around that, which this is certainly one of the funniest entries among the list that is, as far as intended humor. Curiously though, this is the one Friday installment where there's not as much as far as the sex aspect of it.
Where are the boobies?
Which, say what you want, but that is the one ingredient in this recipe of not only Friday the 13th movies, but most slashers in general. Now, this is also the first and only real instance where the young child campers have any sort of interaction with Jason, which produces this sort of will he, won't he cross that line. As far as the kills themselves, they're a little above average in my opinion. Similar to how 7 was cut to shit for rating purposes. This movie suffers that a bit, but it does have some standouts with some on the more comical side, like the face smash, and some that are a little more wince-inducing, like the backbend. However, I've always found the cast of characters in this beyond Tommy to be very weak, though. I guess Court is pretty good, and a lot of people like Megan. I don't know, I find her to be a bit of a pick-me girl. While I do enjoy the final standoff between Tommy and Jason as well, as I've gotten older, I have to admit, I think the better move would have been to kill Tommy off in this one at the end. I know, sacrilege to some, but I feel like for what they were going for with this movie, with the Frankenstein's monster undertone and with the obsession of needing to destroy Jason so badly that it drove Tommy to apparently dig him the fuck up.
Jason belongs in hell. I'm gonna see he gets there.
I just think that thematically, it would have been better to pull the trigger with it, destroying him as well. And it could have been a gut punch moment that put a really nice bow on the whole Jarvis storyline. But then I guess we wouldn't have gotten the Never Hike Alone series as it is now, so either way, very good Jason movie. Well, this was an incredibly pleasant surprise. Number 4 is going to go to Never Hike Alone 2, the only first-time watch on this list as it was just released at the end of last year. And maybe it's recency bias, I don't know, but god damn it, I really enjoyed this. Now this ties the previous 2 installments together and brings it all together as one nice cohesive puzzle, and ultimately does the absolute best thing that a sequel can do, and that is making its predecessors better by the nature of its existence, and it adds on to what the previous movies have brought to the table. Now this picks up 3 months after the events of the original Never Hike Alone, and it follows Tommy Jarvis' storyline as it relates to the previous movie, as he continues to struggle with the demons of his battles of Jason still haunting him. Now, Vincente DeSanti continues to stake his claim as one of the maybe top 3 Jason portrayals we've seen so far, and this is probably his best outing as of yet, as he brings real imposing physicality to it this time, as what we saw glimpses of in the Never Hike in the Snow one. Now, the kills really get to shine in this as well, and we're beginning to see them flex their muscles in the gore department as we get some amazing death scenes and some creative payoffs to the few cutaways that the previous ones did have. Getting Kyle back is great, and I like how they've kind of positioned him as maybe the heir apparent to the Tommy Jarvis throne once that character eventually dies off officially, and he has some awesome moments in this as well.
Hey! Maggot Dick! You looking for this?
I also really like what they're trying to do with the character of Mark's mom and the payoff to her story from Never Hike in the Snow, and trying to find out what happened to and in the end get justice for her son. That's really emotional. I think the new lore aspects they introduced to this are really welcome additions also, in that the lake has some sort of restorative power seemingly for Jason, and that the source of his being and what keeps bringing him back is the head of his mother, and the way they tie that into his getting defeated in the end. It's really smart and poetic, and I think it's just really well done. And even how they leave this open in the post-credit scene for explaining how we might see Jason's next victims finding him, that was really fun as well. And honestly, at this point, I'm ready to hand over the reins and see what these guys at Womp Stomp can do. Give them a full-length Hollywood big-budget Friday the 13th film, because this was extremely good. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Freddy vs. Jason, and for the longest time, you guys, this movie was like my holy grail of cinema. And I don't know if I have ever obsessed or fanboyed about a movie getting made to this degree in my life again, because for about a decade, I felt like I was trying to manifest this movie into existence, with checking for it every time I'd be on the internet, to asking my older cousin, who was more in the know at the time than me, if he knew anything, to reading all the horror magazines and dirt rags. I mean, I wanted this to happen so bad. I'm actually a bigger fan of Freddy than I am of Jason. He's my favorite horror killer, and so just the inclusion of him into this movie gives it a huge boost in its overall factor, and this being Robert Englund's last, at least, movie appearance also makes it very notable, and he has a wonderful swan song. He's back to being a great blend of wicked and hilarious that we hadn't seen since 3, and to a lesser degree 4, and I like how they paint him as the real bad guy of this confrontation, as he's basically using Jason to reinstill the fear into Springwood to allow him to be reborn into people's nightmares again. And I think that's a really creative use of bringing them together in a coherent way. Ken Kersinger's not all that great as Jason. I actually think he's one of the worst ones we've ever seen.
Well, hey, Jethro, this is a rave, not a Halloween party. Why don't you go find yourself a pig to fuck? Yeah.
But Freddy being in this saves it enough, at least for me, that it overshadows that really being a negative. The rest of the cast in this is really great too, especially our final girl, Monica Keena. I actually think she's very underrated overall amongst both franchises, and she would rate higher amongst either one in the best of lists. Now, the kills in this are also really good, with my personal favorite being the bedfold kill. I think that's brutal as fuck, and it's amongst the best we've ever gotten. My only gripe, I wish Freddy would have gotten a higher body count, as it seems like Jason's the one killing nearly everyone, and that's a shame because Freddy's one super standout kill in this movie, it's awesome.
Somebody please wake me up! Please!
And of course, the final confrontation fight we get between the actual Freddy versus Jason is so badass, especially with that soundtrack we have in the background scoring this epic, almost comic book style fight, and Freddy being the sneakier, dirtier fighter, being willing to take cheap shots to offset Jason's obvious huge size and strength advantage. This movie just takes me back to a happy time in my life for so many reasons, and it invokes a lot of the great memories of seeing it in theaters with my friends as I anxiously await some sort of further sequel confrontation between the two that we're probably never going to get. Our runner-up is going to be the 2009 remake, and for the life of me, I just don't understand the hate this movie gets. Outside of maybe just, shitting on remakes as a general rule, just being like the cool and sophisticated movie critic thing to do, but I think as far as that label is concerned, this is one of the best outings overall ever. For my money, Derek Mears is the best Jason we've ever seen on screen, and he is the only true scary Jason due to him bringing the highest sense of realism and physicality to this role. And I'm desperately holding out hope that we'll get him back if we ever do get another official entry. I think the young cast are all really fun for the most part, and I know this one gets a bad rap in particular for having the most unlikable characters, but I didn't see it really save for the ones we're supposed to dislike.
You got perfect nipple placement, baby.
And I despise when characters are introduced simply to be killed off a couple of minutes later, because then I don't give a fuck about them at all. But Jared Padalecki, Danielle Panabaker, Aaron Yu, Andrew Van Winkle, I think this was a really solid combo of recognizable faces at this time as well. The plot is pretty standard, but I thought was very smartly executed, of basically borrowing the best bits from the first 4 movies and retelling them. And the opening sequence before we get the title screen is as intense as this franchise has ever gotten, which honestly is the only real big criticism I have of this movie. We don't ever really get back to that level again, so it blows its load a little early maybe. I do think introducing things like Jason using traps and a tunnel system below the campground to explain his ability to get the drop on people was an incredibly welcome addition, and the fact that he actually sprints after people is what should be the standard from here on out. The kills are also super brutal, from this movie's version of the sleeping bag kill to the screwdriver, and even the things that aren't the final blow, like the bear trap or the one chick that has the boat run into her after Jason hits the dude driving with an arrow. They're all really well done, and most of them are memorably brutal. The soundtrack is great too, and the use of it is actually really smart and clever at times. The moment in the beginning where Wade wanders off and Sister Christian is kicking up in the background, and then kind of unexpectedly you hear him go, Motorhead, what's your price for flight? It just makes me laugh every time. Which brings me to the comedic relief and the timing, which I think are at a near perfect mix with the feel of it still being a horror movie, but has a lot of nicely timed laugh moments in it.
Jesus Christ! Fucking lucky there, Stretch. Came about that close to hitting the start button on a whoop-ass machine, boy.
Hey, are you looking for this? Because it could bleed through out there.
Fuck are you, gun?
Honestly, I can't say enough positive things about it. I saw this on opening night with a few of my friends after hotboxing the car for about an hour beforehand, and I loved it so much I went back more times to see it in the theaters, which makes it one of the only movies I've ever done that and saw more than twice on the big screen. Honestly, maybe on a different day, in a different mood, this could flip into the top spot, just not this time. Because number 1 for me is going to have to go to part 4, the final chapter. And this is the quintessential Jason movie, if you ask me. This is the one I tell people to watch if they've never really gotten into the franchise, because it hits every single box you want for the perfect overall Friday the 13th movie. Starting with a really good Jason casting in Ted White, I think he understood the assignment better than everyone save for Derek Mears. Now the word is, he basically refused to communicate at all with the teenage cast of the movie, and he pretty much sequestered himself at all times in order to maximize their fright of him. And I think it works, because this might be the darkest and meanest Jason that we get on screen, which it shows in the absolutely brutal kills this movie serves up, even right from the start, with our pervy medical examiner guy Axel getting certainly one of the nastiest deaths in the franchise. Or I don't know, maybe it's the guy that gets harpooned in the dick? Or maybe it's poor George McFly who finally gets some strange just to realize he's broken one of the cardinal rules.
Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's
Hello? Anybody home? Hey, think McFly, think.
As you can see, there are definitely no shortage of options. I also think this installment has probably the best cast of supporting characters, which obviously starts with Corey Feldman playing our first portrayal of the Tommy Jarvis character, who would become Jason's archenemy. And he's great in this as that awkward kid who gets the drop on Jason at the end, using his brain to trick him at the right time. We get a great cast serving as the cannon fodder, who I think are more or less fleshed out pretty well, with extra points for Crispin Glover's goofy-ass dancing. And I also dig the addition of the character of Rob, who is the brother of Sandra from Part 2, and I think his introduction as the sibling on a mission to find out what happened to his family makes perfect sense, even if I think maybe it's done better with Jared Padalecki in the remake. But at least Part 4 gives probably the best unintentionally funny moment in maybe any slasher movie ever. As evident by its title, this was intended to be the last movie, and even though we know that's not what happened, I do think this is the best of the ways Jason is finished off at the end, with him getting macheted through the face and sliding down, and then Tommy going further by what some would see as him losing his shit, but I would just call good common scary movie double tap sense. Anyway, this was helped by effects guru Tom Savini coming back to the franchise as well, because he wanted to be part of the killing off of Jason, and he knocked the gore and the effects out of the park like he always does. Because of all of this, Part 4 is what I would consider a perfect Friday the 13th film, and it's the one I reach for most often when going to watch one of these, so it only made sense for it to be the top of this list. That's going to be all for this time, real ones. Tell me what you thought down below, and give me your list as well if you feel so inclined. Do the things to the buttons if you haven't so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you for watching, and happy fucking birthday, Jason.
And today is his